Hello again. You are listening to KXSF LP in San Francisco. This is Pamela Bush, and the show is Fifth Faith Radio, Queerly Drinking. And we today are going to, we, as in the royal we, me and all my personalities, I'm very excited to have Bianca Sanon, who just recently opened up a place in Miami called Paradis, Books and Bread, and they also sell natural wine. And Bianca has had quite a, has been in the industry for a while and has had some experiences. And as somebody who hasn't been to Miami since I was 5 years old, which is just about a half century ago, scary to think, I'm extremely curious to hear more about what's happening in Miami in terms of the natural wine scene and the food scene and just what she's doing, because she has, along with her partners, put together a really fantastic progressive business model. So Bianca, are you there? Do we hear you?
Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm here. How's it going, Pamela?
It's going well. All things considered. I mean, I guess all things considered, anytime in the pandemic. No, everything is good. It's San Francisco, I think, might actually be transitioning to fall. We had summer last week. I could probably do with one more week of the heat, but that's not up to me. Anyway,
yeah, over here in Miami, so
yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I know that it's a totally different. Your climate is something else, and there are definitely those moments when in July when I'm freezing here, when I think I just want to go somewhere warm. Anyway, it is such a pleasure to have you here today. For those of you who are just tuning in the last few seconds or so, you're listening to KXSF LP in San Francisco. The show is Fifth Faith Radio, Queerly Drinking, and I am Pamela Bush, the host, and my guest is Bianca Sanon, a Haitian-American sommelier and service industry worker based in Miami, Florida. She is the co-owner, operator of Paradis Books and Bread, a newly opened cafe, bookstore, and natural wine bar located in North Miami that is owner-operated and offers an intimate and communal space to the people of South Florida. So, Bianca, first, just want to talk a little bit about how you came to do what you're doing. I mean, you're from Miami, but then you lived in New York. You went to college there. I don't know if did you spend some time there after school?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah. So how long were you in New York?
I was in New York for just south of, I think, 8 years. So I didn't get my honorary 10-year New York resident card, but I would say, spending years working in restaurants and going to school there and having a pretty rigorous kind of school schedule, I'm hoping maybe I'm some sort of honorary New York resident. I mean, being there kind of in your formative years between 18 and 25 is kind of shapes who you are, so yeah. I miss it a lot, but I'm definitely happy to be back in the warmth, close to the Caribbean. I feel good about it.
Yeah, that's true. I actually left New York when I was 25, and I guess I was definitely formed. I've been here for 30 years, and yes, I root for the Bay Area sports teams, but I'm a New Yorker. Anyway, though, but I was wondering though what it was like for you, having spent all those years in New York and then going back to Miami. And how that, and I know you were also going to work in corporate fashion.
Yeah,
and that's another thing too. But I guess so it's how did you get sucked into the world of wine and restaurants?
Yeah, it's funny. So I'm actually, and I think it's important to clarify because South Florida people are very sensitive, and when you claim to be from a place that you're not, people will call you out immediately. So I grew up in Fort Lauderdale. In the suburbs of Fort Lauderdale, and then actually moved to Miami for the first time in 2017. But obviously when you're growing up in Broward County and in Fort Lauderdale, you're going to go to Miami a lot. So we would go out, when we're young and 16 and dumb and trying to get into clubs, but mostly was living in the suburbs, and then went to New York for college. And I mean, I feel when you're young and you move to New York, young as in 18 years old, and you're moving to New York for the first time, and you kind of it feels like you have the whole world kind of at your fingertips, in front of you, especially when you're going off to college and you're living by yourself. I feel it was an opportunity to kind of decide, what do I love and what do I like to do? And I've always loved eating. Like that's something that my mom used to tell me when I was little, like you're either gonna end up being a lawyer or a chef, because I love to argue. So that was kind of like, you know, always in conversation. I don't come from like a hospitality family or background or anything. My parents never worked in restaurants. Like it was never like that. I just always loved going out to eat with my family. And so when I went to school and I went to New York, it was kind of, you know, there were two routes I could go, and one of them was fashion. I was very much into it, like, but I feel like now, obviously, like looking back on it, I was more into the idea of it than I was like actually working in fashion. I thought it was fun. I worked a couple fashion weeks, I worked a couple shows, and you know, I had a good time, but I always found myself going out, spending a ton of money at like 21 years old to like Michelin starred restaurants, and like, you know, researching different restaurants and chefs, and like always following like, you know, all the little awards and all the things that like whatever may or may not matter as much to me anymore. But like that was something that I was excited about when I was there. And my partner Brian and I, for our college graduation slash like 4-year anniversary to ourselves, went to Momofuku Co at like 22. And like that's like what we wanted to do with our money, you know? So like that was kind of where my mind was at. And so when I graduated, like right before graduation, I was interviewing for corporate fashion jobs, like in marketing and, you know, international sales. And I just kind of stopped going to my interviews because I was just like, I don't love this. This isn't for me. And I don't really know what exactly I wanted to be doing, but I know it's not this. And then we left and traveled in Europe, you know, the post-college thing. We went to Europe for like 6 weeks, and we ate our way through the place. And looking back on it now, like one of the kind of like inspirations behind our shop right now was Cave Septime in Paris. And I didn't even realize that I went for the first time during that trip, like post college. We were looking at the best restaurants and like where the coolest places were, and we spent all our time in the 11th when we were in Paris. And we went to Septime, and I have like pictures of like baby me at like 22 years old, like at this very cool wine bar, not knowing, you know, what I know now. And so I think, you know, after college is when I was just like making a more of a concerted effort to start working in restaurants, and I didn't know what that would look like. I was open to literally anything. I was like, I just want to get in the industry in some way. And I didn't even start in restaurants. I started at a coffee company. I started Brooklyn Roasting Company as a way to kind of like get in my foot in the door in F&B. And it's funny, I'm jumping a little bit, but my experience in coffee and tasting and like understanding like the tasting wheel and doing cuppings kind of like shaped my palate in some way to be able to understand wine and at least like understand tasting wine. I remember when I first started doing like kind of wine courses, and we were talking about tasting notes, I was at least able to grasp that concept of like pulling out tasting notes from something that's obviously not a fruit, you know, just like even that baseline of understanding what getting blueberry notes out of Ethiopian coffee, I think led me to finding some sort of curiosity about wine tasting. So it's a little bit, I guess, of the foundational time.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I think it's interesting because are a lot of parallels between tasting coffee and tasting wine, and you know, beer and other beverages too. And I'm not I don't drink coffee. I've just never been a big coffee drinker, but I remember when I opened up my first wine bar in 1994 and sitting down with different, they were trying to decide what coffee to do and just sitting down and tasting it. And that it is really similar. I think that it's definitely a good way to train your palate, is to think about not just wine, but think about really any beverage that you taste too. You also mentioned cooking. And that's just another way also, just like tasting food is, and smelling, just being aware of the scents that are around you is I think it's such a great way to learn how to pick up on flavors and analyze wine when you're tasting it.
Yeah, and it's also like, I guess for me, I mean, and this is kind of jumbled up in a different topic, but just like being able to describe to people what a wine tastes like in words that make sense to them, involves tasting things besides wine, right?
Sure.
Like tasting Caribbean food and being able to get certain like spices that we use in certain dishes, or tasting beer and understanding like the differences between like a sour beer, a pale ale, and an IPA, and being like, when we're talking about weight or talking about like texture, there's so many different ways to kind of talk about wine. And I think when there's different perspectives, and some people are coffee drinkers, we actually do get a good amount of folks who work in the coffee industry in our shop, and a couple of them in our wine club. And it's interesting being able to talk to them about how they pick up notes and what they find interesting, and what are the, what they understand as like acidic wine versus not acidic wine. Same way that like there's like acidic coffee and not so acidic, or like, that sort of thing. I think it's really interesting to be able to kind of pull from different perspectives to have people understand what their experience is going to be like when they buy a bottle or buy a glass kind of beforehand. So I think that is something that I've always found really fun and interesting. And I love that kind of like little aha moment when I'm describing a wine to someone and they're like, oh my God, I know exactly what that means. Okay, great. I know what you're talking about. Like that always feels really awesome.
Yeah, sure. It's sort of like when we talk about wines, let's say they have a lot of oak. And I mean, granted, I think sort of working in the natural wine world, you don't really get too many wines like that. But of course, when you're speaking to people, that is something that term that people understand about wines that are heavily oaked. And with coffee, there's like a heavy roast, and it's different. But it's also when you're doing something with whether it's coffee or wine, that is going to really have a big influence on the flavor, and also take away, and doing it in such a way where it's going to mask some of the terroir too. And again, like I'm not saying it's good, it's bad, but what I've noticed is that light roast coffee has definitely gotten popular again. If I think there was a time when everyone wants like, the heavy roast, roasted coffee. And now we're seeing people who are like, yeah, I just want, something light roast. I really want to be able to taste, the inherent flavors of this particular coffee that I'm getting.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to, I did want to ask you, so you went back to Miami, and when did that happen?
2017 was a very long year. So left New York.
So it was 2020.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Nice little like break in between. Yeah, 2017, left New York in late April. And the plan, it's funny, like looking back on it, the plan, maybe I just like never accepted it, but I thought we were just leaving for like a little bit, and then we were going to come back and then maybe move. I don't know. I think I really convinced myself that we weren't leaving just yet. Brian and I, we'd planned to go to Europe for like the whole summer for 3 months. We've been saving up for a while. And we're like, we're just going to lay low. We're going to stay there. We're going to hang out, maybe do some visits, maybe go to restaurants, but really just kind of like chill for a while. My mom grew up going to boarding school in the southwest of France when she was real young. And she's still best friends with her friends that she went to school with. So whenever we go over to France, we stay at her best friend's house. And so she agreed to kind of like house us for the summer, which was really great because we were able to kind of just like hop on a train and travel. And it's all we wanted to do. And I think that almost like was a huge push in my like wine career, for lack of a better term. We visited a bunch of different places and just had so much time. And I think that's what's really important. And what was important for me was to have that kind of time. But so April 2017, we left for Europe, and we put all of our stuff in storage, got back from Europe in late July, or almost early August, and went to North Carolina actually for about like almost 6 months. Brian and his family in Asheville, and I don't know, we weren't quite ready to settle anywhere just yet. I feel like we were just really transient at the time. And that is to say that, the plan was always to open this space. It's been in the works genuinely since Brian and I were about 19, when we were like in love with restaurants and cooking all the time and watching, Travel Channel, Cooking Channel, having these like kind of big ideas of traveling and eating. And so, fast forward to 2017, we're back in Asheville and we're still like unsure of where the space would even be. Like the plan was maybe South Florida, but we were like, oh, maybe it could be Asheville. Like maybe it could be, somewhere, maybe Hudson, maybe upstate New York. I don't know. And then a little bit more time in Asheville at the time, just realizing that it wasn't the place for us. And that's to say that Asheville has completely changed since then, but at the time, you know, as much as I love it, very white progressive, but not a lot of Black folks and folks of color kind of like in the scene. Natural wine was very much few and far between to find at the time. Still there, but like this is before Crocodile Wine opened a couple of years ago, so it was a little bit more difficult to kind of navigate. But it was on the table. You know, we really loved it. We loved the quiet kind of mountain life. So we considered it, but then at some point we were like, we need to go. We need to make it all the way to South Florida, and like we need to do this thing there. So in December, like a week before New Year's, we got in our U-Haul and drove 16 hours with all of our stuff and landed at my parents' house with all of our stuff and just lived in my old childhood bedroom for a few weeks until we found a place in Miami. And then that's kind of where we settled in and started kind of making ourselves comfortable in the Miami community. So yeah, we were thinking, you know, when we'd gotten down to Miami, we weren't exactly sure what the timeline was as far as like when we were going to open. I think that was always kind of like up in the air. I think, you know, we thought really hard about when we wanted to open, but we also wanted to find the right place. I think that was like a big part of it was like, this space needs to make sense for what we want. And that idea changed constantly. That idea went from, you know, maybe it'll be in a plaza at South Florida, like we don't have as much luxury as far as like where it's going to be, to, you know, maybe it's going to be in a standalone building. We didn't know what neighborhood, like we just really didn't know kind of like where or what we wanted to do or what it should look like. And we didn't end up finding the space until 2019. So at least like a year, almost 2 years after we'd moved.
So what were you doing during that time? So you were kind of looking around.
Yeah, so Brian and I moved to what's called like Edgewater, super close to Wynwood, which is like a little bit more of a touristy area, but a lot of young people were living around the Edgewater neighborhood. So I worked at a wine bar first I worked at a kind of pizza place, natural wine spot that had just closed maybe like 3 months after it had opened. And then I started working at a wine bar in just around the corner in our neighborhood. And then Brian was working at a coffee shop. Audrey had moved down in, I think, May of 2018. She started working with Brian. And then Ben was working at Zuma, which is kind of like a high-end sushi restaurant downtown. So we started kind of like, I don't know, like kind of laying roots. We were getting to know who was in the wine world, who was doing natural wine stuff, who were people our age, what do people our age even do down here, as opposed to, you know, I feel like a lot of people were not necessarily warning me, but at least letting me know that the going out culture in Miami is very different than the going out culture, say, in California or LA or New York. You know, a lot of people our age are used to spending a lot of money on very casual meals. I think that's like a part of, at least, and that's like a huge generalization. But as far as like myself and my group of friends, it was very common for people our age to go out and spend money on casual meals. I think that's like a soft generalization.
Yeah, but that's something that I think for people. I mean, I did that when I was younger too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's kind of,
but
I think
not a thing.
Yeah,
I guess South Florida. Like I guess that was the big thing,
yeah.
Is that like a lot of people live at home or live with their parents or aren't used to kind of like spending that kind of money on food. And I think it's just a different relationship with food in South Florida that has changed. And again, it's like, it's even hard to make sweeping generalizations. I used to do it a lot when I first moved down because I thought Miami was this very specific place. And even now, having been here for a while, I catch myself making sweeping generalizations because of how complicated Miami actually is, or South Florida really, but like Miami being that kind of like big city here, it's kind of hard to nail down.
Yeah, I was wondering, especially having spent so much time in New York, and then going back to Miami, and then also like having been in France, what that was, going back to it with the lens of having lived in a really big city for such a long time. And as you said, Miami is changing anyway.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's changing constantly. I think that's what's interesting about it is like, you know, there's certain things that people really love to say. They'll say, oh, there's nothing in Miami. There's nothing to do here. There's no good food. There's no good anything. And it's just different good food or different experiences. Like, the small farm to table restaurants were not and still are not that big of a thing here. And it's complicated and it's confusing because I'm still trying to grapple with the fact that, there's a ton of farms in like South Miami and Homestead and the Redlands, but there aren't a lot of farmers markets. So it's just that whole relationship to food and where it comes from is just different here than in other cities. But the small, independent, family-owned immigrant restaurants are better here, in my opinion, than anywhere else I've ever been. And like spanning across all ethnicities and roots, you have your small Korean restaurants, Sichuan restaurants, Haitian restaurants, Dominican, like they're all incredible and outstanding and kind of different from, obviously, yes, everyone's like, all the small places in New York are great, but I don't know, something about those types of restaurants in Miami feel so real. They feel like a piece of home for the people who are making the food. It feels, I don't know, it feels really connected in a really interesting way. So that's kind of that. But, Miami it's really hard to nail down sometimes because there are people who've been trying and experimenting. And I think that's actually the point. People can experiment a lot more here. I think people can try and do something and maybe it doesn't work and they pivot and they do something else. And maybe that works for a while, but then they pivot again. And like, I think that's the rhythm that we've been on for better or for worse.
What do you think that is? Is it because the cost of living is not as great, or it's easier to open a business than in other places?
Living in a lack of foundation, I think. I mean, myself and other folks in the industry, we've talked a lot and kind of tried to figure out what is the thing. There's so many different little things. Like, what is the thing that like makes Miami so different and so unlike other cities, specifically talking about our industry? There's so many other things that we can get into, but like, a lot of people say that Miami is like a young city, which yes and no, but like definitely as far as like when it was incorporated. But I think it's just a lack of foundation and a lack of like infrastructure a lot of times. And that's everything from kind of like the tax structure in South Florida to the fact there's like little public transportation, the fact that you have to drive everywhere, the cost of living and why people choose to live at home with their parents instead of renting. The fact that it's such a big city, it's very spread out. Like you could be in Aventura, which is technically like a part of Miami, and be an hour and a half away from, South Homestead or something, which is also Miami. So, and having no public transportation to meet those 2 points together, it's like, it might as well be different states at that point. So
yeah, that sounds a lot like LA.
Yeah, very much. It's very similar to LA in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so let's talk about Paradis Books and Bread. So I feel like we're getting your story and we're just about at the point where this is coming together.
Yes.
And it was, I know it's you and Brian, but you also have your partners. So how with this, and there are people that you, as mentioned, there are people that you knew from sort of the food and wine scene in Miami and
right, and New York actually. So Audrey is Brian's sister.
Okay.
We worked at a radical bookstore in New York called Blue Stockings. So it's like Blue Stockings Collective now. And it's like a queer feminist bookstore.
Oh yeah, I know.
On Stanton, or no, on Allen, I'm sorry. And She met Ben working at River Park, which is one of Tom Colicchio's restaurants. It's closed now. And she was the farm manager there. And he started off as a prep cook and worked all his way up to event chef. Super talented, keeps his head down, works super hard. And so he's a part of the team. And we met Joseph back in 2014. Was one of our best friends. And he is very much kind of like a jack of all trades, but definitely a master of many also. I don't know. He's like incredibly talented and really special. He worked with Brian at a coffee shop, Joe Coffee, and then worked with me at Major Food Group for a hot minute, then went back to Joe, but was always this like extremely talented person who just needed a kind of vessel to shine, like he had a lot of talent, but was like working for other people. And that was obviously the big part of opening up our own space, was not having to work for other people. So we all kind of signed on during the pandemic, which is funny because Brian and I and Audrey, we've been thinking about the place for a while and just ended up having this kind of like perfect synthesis with Joe and Ben, who both signed on and were like, yeah, let's do it. I'm down. And it turned into this saga of finding the right place. That took us 2 years. Then, closing on the building 3 months before COVID, trying to find a grant because there was no way that we were able to do this whole project without it. And fast forward to now, we've been open for almost 3 months. And it's funny when you get to the place where your place exists and it's been existing in your mind for such a long time. And then the construction part of it felt like it was just going to be this forever thing.
The construction's always like that.
Yeah. Oh my God, it was horrible. It was like,
it's never, just realize it's always going to cost more and take longer than what you think.
Yeah, man. And we knew, like, we were prepared. Everyone told us all the things. You're just in the middle of it and you're just screaming into the ether, waiting for it to all be over. And so it's funny to be here and people ask like, oh, like, does it feel like a long time ago? Like that time, like it does, like, it really does feel like this other lifetime that just had to happen for us to get here.
Yeah. But so you have it's a pretty for the wine and, as you say, it's owner operated, and it's which in a way it's a kind of a unique model for the wine and restaurant business, which isn't to say that other people don't do this. I mean, there are lots of places that are just super small, or but where you say like that is your philosophy. Historically the industry has been one where there's the owner and then there are the workers, and especially usually you get paid a minimum wage, especially if it's a restaurant or a wine bar, and it's expected that you're going to get paid minimum wage, and basically you're just going to get tips, and that's and so you're making a statement here with Paradis Bar and Books. So I was just wondering, like, if you could just tell me and tell everyone who's listening a little bit more about why you decided to set your business up this way, and how really, like, how that works, the nuts and bolts of how that works on like a daily basis.
Yeah. I mean, we decided kind of early on, like very early on, that we didn't want employees. I say we as very early on, Audrey, Brian, and I kind of envisioned this hybrid place that had food and had books and had wine and was like kind of a restaurant, but not really a restaurant, and really nailing down what that looked like in our minds, that when we executed it in real life, it flowed and it worked. But the entire time, I mean, it's tough because you don't want to call your shot too early, or you don't want to claim this title without really thinking through what that looks like. But as close to this ideal of an anti-capitalist, non-hierarchical business, this is where we're at. Like, as much as like we don't want to even like claim any sort of like official title, but straying away from traditional capitalist structures in which there is an owner and there are people who work for you and you're not there and you collect the money afterwards. That's not to say that, that's how businesses exist in this country and that's how things exist, but that's just not what we want to do. We don't want to be the people that own this place and sit at home and make the money. Like, it's just not something that we're interested in. And at the same time, we are service industry workers insofar as like we've all had these jobs and we've all more or less enjoyed them and enjoyed the good parts. Everybody knows that there's the bad parts. We know all about the bad parts, but there are the good parts that we really do love. And like, that's showing people a good time, that's hosting people, that's teaching people, that's allowing people to rest and enjoy themselves and feel good about whatever it is that they're doing in that moment and feel comfortable and feel welcomed. And so we also want to be a part of that. I don't want to be at home ordering wine and someone else is pouring the wine for me and telling me what they sold. And I don't get to be a part of that experience of what that person got and how that changed them. Because I know about all the experiences that shaped me and changed me and made me excited. And I would want to be a part of that. And none of us can speak to what the space is going to, what this model is going to look like, but we are sticking to this model of being owner operated. We just, we're allowing this space to kind of shape us and change us. And as it's going, we know what it needs, but baseline, we just don't want to have that kind of like exploitative relationship with the space.
Yeah, that's cool. And it's, it also, as you said, you're 3 months into it. If you were, let's say, because there are 4 of you who were
5 of us.
5. Okay, so and that's a pretty good number. So if somebody goes away or sick or whatever, you have coverage, but you never know. You might get really busy and need to have more people be a part of it. Would you envision then where anyone else who was working there would also have a piece of ownership?
That's a great question. And it's something that we actually haven't really fully fleshed out yet. We're trying to even manage like what it would look like for us to be so busy that we would need another person and what that other person would be doing. We close 2 days a week. We might, our hours are always adjustable, but we're open essentially all day with the kitchen closed for 3 hours in the middle of the day. It depends. I mean, we've talked about doing the volunteer thing or like an exchange system, or like we've talked about just like different possibilities. We have so many friends who have been so gracious and willing to help and wanting to just be like, hey, if you guys go on vacation, let me sit on register. Just tell me how to work the register and I'll do it for you for a day. That's something that people have brought to the table, and it's fair. I mean, we haven't really gotten to a point in which we're like, oh, we need to hire help, but for as long as we can, we'd prefer not to. And it's just like this firm thing of like, I would much rather change things structurally. Like, I would rather adjust what we're doing so that we don't have to hire, like if we're doing too much, if we're trying to do too much, I'd much rather adjust on that end than trying to scale up to what's going on.
Mm-hmm. So we need to take another quick break here, and then we'll be back in just a minute. You are listening to KXSF LP in San Francisco. The show is Fifth Wave Radio / Queerly Drinking. I am Pamelouie Bush, and my guest is Bianca Sanon. So give us just a brief second, and I will be right back with you. Hello again. For all who just tuned in, you're listening to KXSF LP in San Francisco. This is Pamelouie Bush, the host of Fifth Wave Radio Queerly Drinking, and my guest is Bianca Sanon of Paradis Books and Bread in Miami. So the name of your business is Paradis Books and Bread. How did you come up with that name?
It kind of took a while, and then we were kind of just like, let's just stick with this. So we went back and forth on a couple different ideas, and we're just like, let's just do this because it's pretty direct. It's pretty straightforward. Obviously, yes, we do wine, but we also do sourdough bread. It's kind of like our specialty. We do everything in house, pretty high hydration, stone cold ground or milled flour from Carolina ground. And it's a radical bookstore. It's a kind of South Florida's first left leaning or left focused progressive bookstore. And that's something that we also really want to highlight as far as what the space offers. It's funny because I guess, I mean, a lot of radical bookstores and a lot of these types of places don't really offer alcohol. They're typically more sober spaces. And so we try to be very wary and be very careful of that as well. And so we offer non-alcoholic options as well. And we're going to be growing our beverage program more to incorporate, maybe some non-alcoholic cocktails and spritzers and different things to be able to encourage just kind of accessibility for a lot of people. The name itself comes from actually this kind of absurdist filmmaker, Alexander Jodorowsky. He directed Holy Mountain, which is kind of a culty, very wild movie.
I know his work. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, some people, I've been explaining the name of the place this week, and a lot of people are like, I don't know what you're talking about, which is fair. But Brian and I watched his film Endless Poetry a few years ago while living in North Carolina, actually. And there's a scene, it's like kind of like a fictional autobiography. And there's a scene where he's super young and he has this monologue. He's in this warehouse space that he just found that he's going to take on as his like little artist warehouse. And he has this monologue where he's like, this is my kingdom. I'm going to do whatever I want here. I'm going to have my friends. I'm going to have parties. I'm going to be inspired to kind of do all these things, and it's going to be paradise. And he said it, and we were kind of like, that's cool. Yeah, that's the thing. It's going to be like paradise, like being like the thing that you've always wanted, and that special place where people feel comfortable and having your friends and doing whatever you want. So that's kind of a combination of the name of it.
Yeah. Did you see Jodorowsky's Dune, the documentary about him trying to make Dune?
No, we watched Dune recently. Also, God, everything's in North Carolina. We also watched it in North Carolina. But no, we did not watch it.
Yeah, if when you get a chance, check out the doc. It's fascinating, especially with a new version of Dune coming out.
Yeah.
So yeah, but Jodorowsky definitely is a pretty fascinating cat.
Yeah, he sure is.
Yeah. So I know you have this bookstore, and then you make your own bread, and then there's natural wine. So. Yeah. First, I see. What is it that you're drinking now? It's since you're 3 hours ahead. You're definitely at a time of the day when it's very acceptable.
Yes, it is very much happy hour right now. I am drinking Domaine de la Bohème, Patrick Boujou, the Mole, 100% Gamay from volcanic soils in Auvergne.
Yeah, I honestly was trying to get a bottle so we could drink that together, and it seems like everyone is up here is getting it like today, which means so. Yeah, I was trying to. As a matter of fact, I think the folks over at Gemini are gonna hold the bottle for me. I hope. Maybe I'll go over and try to get it after this. But yeah, I know that's a really highly allocated wine. So can you just tell us a little bit about it, and also about the Auvergne, which is a region that definitely is, especially when the natural wine scene is a pretty hot region right now. But 10 years ago, nobody really talked about it.
I mean, it's fair. I mean, it's like it's kind of southern central France. Like it's in this really interesting space, like close to Languedoc, close to the Rhone, close to the Loire, kind of like in its own little realm. It focuses on Gamay and Pinot, but the most interesting thing about it is that it's like volcanic soils, like basalt, super ancient soils. And the wine like really kind of drinks like a Nerello Mascalese to me, like an Etna wine. It has that like smoky but like ethereal kind of quality to it. Like it's not smoky like Canary Island smoky, like it's like in your face, like it's really subtle and on the back end, but like then you still get the Gamay fruit quality, that high acid, but it's a little bit spicy also. So it's for me, I picked it because I said at the beginning of the show, but Florida, I used to be really staunch about saying that Florida never had seasons. It was just like hot all the time. But it's been like really pleasant for the last couple of weeks. It's been like nice and breezy. The humidity's kind of kicked. So this is what our fall looks like, where it's 82, but not 100% humidity. And it feels really nice. And I wanted to kind of have a wine to shift into that fall season. And I've been drinking Glue Glue light reds for months, and rosés. I'm still gonna have rosé tomorrow, but
Yeah.
for this, I was just like want to kind of celebrate that going into the fall season. It's super lovely. I think this wine is kind of like a testament to where we're at in the natural wine world in Miami. There's no universe in which I thought Patrick Bourgeois wines would ever get down here. When I first moved here a couple years ago, and I have plenty of it, and so I wanted to, be able to enjoy it myself, and it's something that I know that I can do now that we would not have been able to do 4 years ago.
Well, maybe I should get a bottle from you since no here. But yeah, I mean, I think like I know that Zevrevine is the importer, and I've talked to Zev and about how just natural wine is exploding, and not just in like the coastal areas and the cities, but yes, it's there. But I think that it's slowly sips making its way into the mainstream. And I wanted to ask you sort of how you felt right now about natural wine, and also how we can make it, not just natural wine in general, but especially natural wine, because I think it does come with a little bit of, baggage isn't really the right term, but it's just, it does often come across as being, a little bit of like an elite thing, a cool kids club, that kind of thing. How is it that we can make it more accessible and inclusive to people?
I love that question. And it's kind of wrapped up in a bunch of things I'm thinking about right now. I know when I started getting into natural wine, I absolutely thought it was the cool kids club. I was like, I don't know what you people are talking about. I don't know what this is. No one's really telling me what it is. I'm trying to like figure it out for myself. Like I think about the first time I went to the first Raw in New York in 2016, and like just feeling whisked away and feeling like I'd been working in the industry for like a year and a half, and I didn't even think that I was qualified to have, the industry pricing, or like I didn't even consider myself industry somehow. Like that's how detached I felt from it, and how much I didn't even feel like I should be included because I didn't know enough about it. And I felt like this very strong feeling of like, if I don't know about this thing, I can't claim to be a part of it, And I feel like that was my unfortunate but real kind of relationship to it, and I wanted to know about it, and I just did everything I could to figure it out.
Well, but I think that's been true of the wine industry in a lot of ways too. Like when I first started getting into it 30 years ago, and I would, I was, younger then, and I would go in, and it was very, even more so than now, really male dominated, and there was this always kind of this sense of like, who are you? I remember when I first moved to San Francisco, I was invited to a tasting over at Green's restaurant, and it was a Merceau, like a Merceau tasting. And I was sitting around, I think there might have been one other woman there, and there were probably about, or maybe not, like 10 to 12, middle-aged guys, and they just basically ignored me.
Sure.
Yeah. Sure. So I mean, the point is that I think, what you're saying, I think there are certain specifics to natural wine because it is like the cool kids club as opposed to being, the old boys club.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And that still permeates. That's still a thing. I think there's just so many amazing people in the industry who are very loud about ending it, and I'm very fortunate to have some of those people be some of my really good friends, and it feels good to have those people in your corner, man. It's really incredible. But as far as like natural wine becoming more mainstream, it's a weird combination of, people want to say it's because of the pandemic. It was definitely before the pandemic. It was definitely celebrities and influencers and people on the internet and Instagram that kind of made natural wine this like cooler than cool thing of like, if I'm cool, I also have to drink this cool thing. I don't mind. I like it. I like seeing, and this is for, people might not like it, but I like seeing natural wine at Whole Foods. I live in a place where people buy wine from Publix and Total Wine and grocery stores and Walgreens, and like that is like a lot of like the young people not in the restaurant industry. That is where people buy wine because they're not used to small independent wine shops, because those are also fancy wine shops that sell exorbitantly priced wines.
Right. So, yeah. And it's hard to find natural wine for under $20 a bottle.
It's and trying to convince someone And I mean, that's what's wrapped up in kind of like the whole culture of like South Florida, not having our farmers markets and not knowing where your vegetables come from. Sure, it's very similar to wine as well. Of like, I don't know why I should buy this wine for $29, retail when it's just vin de France or something. It's like a table wine. So that involves a lot of conversation. But natural wine becoming more mainstream makes that easier. It's not even a matter of convincing anymore. We're in a neighborhood in Miami that's not anything like South Beach. We're in a very working class, almost residential neighborhood with like a small downtown area. North Miami is not on the beach. It's not anywhere near water. It's very close to I-95. And it's around a lot of neighborhoods where people live. And that's partly why we wanted to open our shop where it is because people are commuting, they're going home, they're nearby, they're at home, they're working from home and just want a place to grab a glass or grab a bottle. And it's been incredibly successful partly because people already know what they want when they show up. A lot of people already know what natural wine is and are excited about it. And they'll be like, oh, are all your wines organic? And we're like, oh, no, but the question that you're asking, yes, like if that's what you're looking for. So, as far as natural wine becoming a big thing, it's what I've always wanted. I wanted more people to drink this delicious stuff and be able to talk about it and have an interest in it. And the quickest way to get people to be even more invested in it is for them to be exposed to it at all. Mm-hmm. So like having that baseline jumps that conversation. I don't think natural wine needs to be this like super secret exclusive club that makes you feel good about yourself. Like it should be something that we share, especially if anyone has ever been lucky enough to go visit some of these winemakers in their own home. They are, 5 hectares. Their bedroom is inside of the cave. They have a 20-year-old car. Like they're living pretty simply. This isn't everybody. Obviously, there's some winemakers that are living real nice, and that's a different thing. But some of the winemakers that I was able to visit, I think about Dominique Andilan all the time because that was one of the most incredible visits in the Southwest and the Gascogne region in France. And we visited him, and at one point he had 18 hectares. He went down to 11 hectares because he was just like, I can't really do all of this. It's kind of exhausting, and I'm going to scale down. And we taste with him in his tasting room, which is his cave inside of like what looks like a storefront. It literally looks like a plaza inside of, or a storefront inside of a plaza. And his bedroom is upstairs, and the bathroom has like no door. It's the most basic and simple thing in the entire world. And yet some of his wines, like the Pissenlit, is like one of the most allocated wines like in the US. But like, I think about him and how simple he is and what lifestyle he has, and having people understand that on the other end and treating it with this kind of like, this is meant for people to share. This is supposed to be delicious and easy and not, $6,000 for the bottle kind of wine culture. I think that's what I'm hoping we get at some point, is treating it with this sort of like, this is delicious, but it's meant to be shared. It's not supposed to be gussied up into any, kind of big thing. So
yeah, and with so much natural wine now being allocated, that it sort of like goes against that grain of being shared. On the other hand, so many of these producers make so little wine. And so, yeah, when I was talking to, just talking to some folks, and they're like, yeah, we were getting 3 bottles of it. It's not even like a case. We're getting
no.
And what often happens if you get 3 bottles is that the person who owns the place, they're drinking it. They're not sharing it. Yeah.
No, I got a 2-bottle allocation of something a month or so ago, and I was like, I'm going to drink this. I'm going to put one of these away.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to put this in the fridge, and then I'm going to drink the other one at the end of the night, because I'm not going to sell 2 bottles of anything.
Yeah, because when you have that, it almost sets up a competition between your customers too.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So, but I think the other hand is there are so many more people making natural wine, and just to here in California, I see the explosion what's happened, and like up in Vermont, what's happening, and obviously in France and in Europe, now there's wine from California I want to drink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of
Yo,
food. Great.
15 years ago, I could have named on one hand. Even 10 years ago, maybe I could have named
Yeah.
on one hand the wines from California I wanted to drink, and now, I drink California probably wine half the time.
Yeah.
So, well, or close to it. But yeah, no, it's definitely, there's so much more out there. So even if there are only like 6 bottles that a retailer or wine bar has to sell, the job is to try to find all the other stuff, the new stuff that's coming on, where there is some more of it, and it's constantly going to be there.
Sure.
Yeah. So we just have a couple of minutes left, or like a minute left. I just wanted to, can you just remind everyone of the name of your place and where it's located?
Yes. Paradis Books and Bread, cafe, bookstore, natural wine shop, and bar in North Miami, Florida.
Okay, well, that's great. I mean, I'm just looking at the time and I was like, wow, it is just about 3 o'clock here. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. I wish we had some more time, but it sounds like you and your colleagues have created something really great, for yourselves and for your customers, and a space that I think will probably also serve as a model for others who have a similar dream. So congratulations to you. I'm thinking about getting down to going to Florida in a few months.
That would be amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This is awesome. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Bye.